Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm Chip Giller. I'm I think I know many of you. I am the co-founder and executive director of Agog. And so just wanted to welcome you to Agog House. And I believe this is our fourth community meetup. We're running these meetups monthly, sometimes more than once a month, and they feature speakers who are doing impactful work with immersive tech. So our event today, as I think all of you know, explores the intersections of Indigenous storytelling and immersive media with Melanie and Isabelle from the Indigenous Screen Office. And so I'm going to invite them onto the stage in a moment. But first, just wanted to provide a little bit of context about Agog for those of you who are new here. So we at Agog, we're a philanthropic organization whose purpose is to help people use XR to imagine and to build a better world. We help creators and organizations using XR for social good with an emphasis on climate change, food justice, indigenous knowledge, and human rights. And our work kind of falls into three categories. The first is around connecting and convening XR creators and social change leaders and other mission-based folks. Second, as a philanthropic organization, we support creators with philanthropic grants and with technical support. And then finally, even as we're Agog, we're a learning organization, even as we're learning a ton, we want to share what we're learning as we go. We want to open source what we are gleaning with the community in the form of guides and resources and more. So that's a bit about Agog. You can stay updated on our work by signing up for our newsletter at agog.org. So some recent highlights, just to make this a bit more real, of our work include we're doing a partnership with the Cultural Hub in Montreal, PHI. And so PHI Immersive is going to support an intensive 4-week residency program in Montreal. And participants who take part in this residency will have the time and resources to transform their ideas into a prototype ready for broader production. So if anyone's interested in that, there's a call for submissions now that's now open. It's open until June 24th. And there are information sessions, which you can learn about on our website. One taking place in French on May 13th at 11 a.m. Eastern. And there's a second one taking place on May 15th in English at 11 a.m. Eastern. A second example of our work is we're teaming up with the Tribeca Film Festival and Onassis Onyx to help produce Tribeca's immersive track, which will feature impact-focused XR projects. That's going to be taking place in New York City from June 4th through the 15th. And the selections for the festival, the immersive selections, will be published by the end of this month, so keep an eye out for that. And then Tribeca will be the focus of our next community meetup on May 15th, and that will be a chance to meet the full team behind Tribeca Immersive. One other thing I wanted to call out is following that community meetup, we're going to be doing another one in May, on May 29th, and that will feature Black public media and speakers from this year's Black Pitch Forum, which is really the largest pitch competition of its kind in the US for independent filmmakers and creative technologists whose content reflects the Black experience. So I wanted to call out all that. I also wanted to share this beautiful world, which was built by two creators, Shushu and Nico. We want to invite community members to host their own events in Agog House. So to host your own event, feel free to chat at any time with Mengelberg. He's here to my right, and he can help manage that process. So we'd really love to see this space put to good use. So now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the stage my colleague Raul, who's a senior project manager at Agog, to introduce today's program. Thanks all.
Thanks, Chip. Hi, folks. I'm Raul Carvajal. It's really nice to be here with you all. Thanks for joining us. We've got a really stellar session for you today with Melanie, Nepinak, Hadley, and Isabelle Ruiz, two awesome leaders from the Indigenous Screen Office. Couple pieces of housekeeping. If you're watching on the live stream, especially on YouTube, feel free to drop in your questions in there. We'll be doing Q&A after their talk. And then also, if folks in the audience wouldn't mind just staying muted while the talk is happening, that way everybody can have a good experience hearing the conversation as it unfolds. So we really appreciate that. Now I'll welcome these two remarkable leaders back. They're going to be discussing what it means to work with Indigenous communities in XR, narrative, and documentary storytelling, and all the lovely work as it intersects with some of the mission of Agog as well. So without further ado, let's welcome Melanie and Isabelle.
Woo! Welcome.
Woo woo.
Woo! Thank
everyone.
you so much. Hi. Anine, and hello. My name is Melanie Nepinak Hadley. Thank you so much for the intro. I love this audience already. Maybe my favorite audience of the year. I'm joining today's meetup from Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Toronto sits in the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, including the Chippewas, the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, and Métis people. I myself am Ojibwe and a proud member of Minnegozi-Bay Anishinaabe, and I currently serve as the Vice President of Industry, Partnerships, and Growth at the Indigenous Screen Office. Here is a brief reel to give you a stronger sense of the work that the ISO supports. So please, next slide and run the reel.
Galactic. Galactic.
It is so hard for me not to listen to that reel and dance the whole time. I'm really proud of myself for controlling myself because I don't know if my dancing translates to the bear. Now, the ISO is dedicated to supporting Indigenous storytellers and ensuring narrative sovereignty in Canada. Essentially, we empower Indigenous creators to tell their own story in their own way, and we do this through funding and advocacy. Next slide. With that, I'm actually happy to hand it off to my colleague, Isabelle, and she can introduce herself and just share a little bit more about what we do and how we do things. Isabelle.
Thanks, Mel. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here today. And thank you to the wonderful Agog team for putting this on and having us here. My name is Isabelle Ruiz. I am a program manager at the Indigenous Screen Office. I am in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, where I was born and raised. I am a Ganyagahaga or Mohawk woman through my dad, and I'm a member of Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, which is a community in Southern Ontario. And I'm also of European descent. I've been with the ISO for 4 years, and I manage a variety of funding programs at the ISO, namely the Interactive and Immersive program, which I'll talk to you a little bit about today. Briefly, for those who are uninitiated, the ISO, the Indigenous Screen Office, was officially started in 2018 after generations of advocacy and work on behalf of Indigenous filmmakers. There was an increasing and urgent demand for an organization that was run and led by Indigenous people that could administer funding, advocate to the broader industry, and create more opportunities in ways that were culturally relevant, responsible, and listened and responded to community needs. And we can go to the next slide. Now, as Mel briefly touched on, the urgency of this work comes from the fact that for over a century, Indigenous people have been misrepresented on screen in a very long cinematic tradition that actively excluded our peoples and relied on harmful stereotypes about us. And those on-screen misrepresentations have been used to create real-world harm, real-world erasure, and barriers. This is why our work is grounded in the concept of narrative sovereignty. Narrative sovereignty for us means that Indigenous people have control over their own stories, which includes creative and financial control, majority representation in key creative positions, and much more. And Mel will talk to you a little bit about some of our funding programs through which we carry out this mandate. Go to the next slide.
Also like that Isabelle said how long she's working here. I feel like it's important for me to mention that I have been at the ISO for 5 minutes. I just started in January. I'm still learning the ropes. So I'm so grateful that Isabelle could be here as part of this. Now, a core part of our work is providing diverse funding opportunities. Within these categories that you see here, it includes development, production for features and TV series, finishing funds for those projects, marketing and distribution support for those projects, sector development, and specific programs for interactive and immersive projects and podcasting. Next slide. We also offer travel funding, enabling our creators to connect and share their work on national and international stages. But more on that later. I'm going to pass it back to Isabelle, and she'll share a little bit about the impact that we've had.
So I like to put this slide up just to give you sort of a high-level overview of our last officially reported year, which was 2023-24. And I'll draw your attention to a couple key stats that for us represent sort of the heart of our work, which is 33% of recipients based on reserve or non-urban centers. For us, it's really important that we support people where they are, and they don't have to leave their communities. They don't have to leave where their families, their support systems are. They can create work in a place that is relevant to them. And then I'll also pull your attention to the 53% of women identified recipients. And we have sort of always had gender parity within our funding. Not to say that this is something that's easy for us, but I think is really in line with a lot of Indigenous communities and the way that we work. A couple things I'll say quickly about this past year, and our annual report will come out in the coming months, but we've had 464 applicants across all of our programs, and we've provided funding in almost every province and territory in the country, except for Prince Edward Island and the Northwest Territories. And we're actually excited, and we're going to work hard to make sure that those regions are accessing our programs in the years to come. Go to the next slide. Something that I will spend a little bit of time on here, which is directly related to sort of what I was talking about in terms of that regional representation and sort of the heart of our work, is the on-screen protocols and pathways document. For those of you who are maybe not familiar with this resource, you can find it on our website. If you Google the name, you'll find it. It's available in PDF online quite easily. But this document was led by a team at the Imaginative Film Festival, which is the largest Indigenous film festival in the world, which happens annually in Toronto, Ontario. It's happening at the beginning of June this year, so if you can, please come. And this document was intended to lay down a positive, forward-thinking framework for Indigenous storytellers and the people who want to work with us. The intent of the guide is to, and here I'll quote directly from them, the intent of the guide is to provide decision-making guidelines for communities, content creators, funding bodies, and industry partners, to share best practices developed by Indigenous screen storytellers, to educate screen content creators, production companies, and gatekeepers about Indigenous worldviews, cultural and property rights, and the protection of Indigenous cultural practices, and finally, to encourage informed, respectful dialogue between communities, content creators, and production companies. This document really serves as a base understanding of the concept of protocols in Indigenous communities and some of the important learnings when working with our people. Now, I highlighted the quote on the screen that you'll see from an Inuk filmmaker, Alethea Arnica-Corrill, because I think this sort of speaks to some of these, this community consciousness or understanding that is important when going into different communities. She says here that Inuit society, traditional leadership is fluid and situationally specific, which, can be antithetical to strict hierarchies that you see in a lot of on a lot of sets or a lot of production, which Mel, I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I myself have a lot of experience in production, but also my husband is a member of IATSE, so I'm all too familiar with that hierarchy and sort of almost a militant approach that can sometimes happen on set.
Yeah, exactly. We can go to the next slide, and Mel, I'll let you go on and talk about delegations and international initiatives.
Yes, thank you, Isabelle. That's my favorite part of the presentation, is actually starting to dive into the pathways and the protocols, which we're going to speak about a little bit more when we have our chat after this. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have a lot of sort of international activity. We actively foster industry connections and create pathways for Indigenous talent. We facilitate international delegations to events like Cannes, Berlinale, Maoriland, Series Mania, Content London, so many more, as you can see here. Next slide. We proactively support delegations to equip our creators with the pathways to global success, thereby continually raising the visibility of our specialized office and its work, which is actually something I wanted to just mention earlier in the presentation, that our office is unique in that it is the only independent Indigenous run office. You'll see often Indigenous departments exist with other funding bodies, but we are actually its own entity. So that's really cool and really kind of lends itself to giving this prime example of some of our work. This is something we did where we were involved very early on a new series, North of North, which is actually now available worldwide on Netflix. So through our sector development fund, we were among the initial partners supporting the creation of the Iqaluit studio, where this project was filmed. With that support, we recognized both the immediate potential of the series, but we also recognized the long-term opportunity to bolster the Northern storytelling community. We also played a crucial role in completion through our other funding stream. Next slide. This series is uniquely Canadian, it's uniquely Indigenous, and now that it's available globally, we really, really encourage you all to watch it and just rewatch it. I've seen it a few times. I actually got to read scripts in earlier days at my past employer, and I'm just so you just get something with every watch. It's definitely one of those series that you can rewatch over and over again. So I hope you guys get a chance to check it out. But with that, I'll hand back to Isabelle to round us out.
Yeah, thanks. I'll transition now to talking about our interactive and immersive initiatives and funding, which is how we initially got linked up with the lovely folks at Agog. So since 2020, we've been working hard to strengthen and develop the Indigenous XR sector. Initially, this was through partnership and targeted support. Starting out, we worked with MIT's co-creation studio to run a virtual incubator, which happened in 2020 during the pandemic. We have since worked with MIT's co-creation studio to support the 2023 Indigenous Immersive Incubator, and we supported 3 Indigenous-led XR projects to incubate at MIT. We also, one of the people that was included in that is Lakaluk Williamson Bathory and her project Tartupaluk, which is a Canada-Denmark-Greenland co-production, which participated in the Venice Production Bridge in 2023. And I'll talk a little bit more about that project and our support for it afterwards. And this past year, we worked with them again to bring 4 Indigenous delegates to MIT to participate in Worlding, which you see up here on screen. The image that has Worlding on it, you'll see David Newman, the head of the MIT Media Lab, Lisa Jackson to her right, and Alvin Harvey, who were speaking after the screening of Lisa Jackson's Wilfred Buck Star Stories at the Charles Hayden Planetarium. So we were really proud to be the sole production funder for this Dome project. And this Dome project was based off of a documentary that Lisa made about a Cree knowledge keeper and astronomer, Wilfred Buck. and took some of the stories, four traditional stories that Wilfred took, and created just this absolutely beautiful, captivating dome project that we all got to enjoy. And there was a discussion afterwards. Agog was a great supporter of our work at Worlding, and we were able to support four delegates who, if we go to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit more about them in a moment. So alongside of the partnership and incubator efforts that we do, we have also worked very hard to develop a specific funding program that responds to the needs of our creators. So in 2023, we had the first interactive and immersive funding program that accepted applications for the creation of XR works, including immersive installations, video games, apps, virtual reality, and more. The first year, we received 9 applications and allocated $500,000 to these projects. The funded projects included an interactive music video, an immersive installation with a purpose-built physical environment for display, a dome project, and more. This most recent year, in 2024-25, we received 26 applications and allocated $675,000 to 9 successful recipients. We worked with the Canada Media Fund, a large funding agency here in Canada. This year, we partnered with them on the program to expand it to meet the growing demand. Now, I want to take a bit of time and pause here and highlight some of the projects you see on the screen, because I think they're really incredible and I just want to give them their time to shine. And they highlight both some of the things that we funded through our program and also some of the initiatives that we do outside of the funding program. So in the top left, the sort of snowy image, is the project from Lakaluk Williamson Bathory that I mentioned a little bit ago. It's an upcoming virtual reality work called Tatupaluk, which takes place on a small real-life island, which is claimed by both Denmark and Canada, but is and has always been Inuit traditional hunting territory. Lakaluk takes this place and imagines a sort of a lover's utopia in which she is the president of this republic. And it's a really captivating, funny, beautiful work that is about exploring decolonization of this land and of others with reverence and humor, sexuality, and politics. Next to that is a photo from MUTEC, which is a digital media and electronic music festival that has chapters all over the world, but one in Montreal. And we gathered artists and one person who works at Indigeneity, the film festival I mentioned earlier, to talk about Indigenous storytelling and distribution in XR. We're at a moment right now where people are still figuring out distribution pathways for XR. Where do you bring these projects? Who's seeing them? How do you set them up? How do you get audiences in? And some of the creators on stage here were talking about, the ways that they brought their virtual reality projects about experiences with residential schools into school curriculums, or how they put community tours into their distribution plan to make sure that the people who are really implicated in these projects are the people who have access to them. I'll also mention that Imaginative has every year their In Digital space, which shows XR works from Indigenous creators as well as podcasting. So they have this really beautiful, again, purpose-built space that happens in downtown Toronto, where you can go see the most cutting edge, most beautiful Indigenous XR works. The 4 lovely people here behind me are Asiniak, Jason Ryle, Tasha Hubbard, and Lisa Jackson, who were the delegates at MIT's Worlding this year. All of them have incredible XR projects in development that sit at this intersection of technology and climate, and are interesting because they do build off of works that exist in other mediums. So whether that's doc or narrative feature film, they're taking these stories and expanding them and branching them off into these new technologies. Lastly, something that we're really proud to support here is from Revital Software. This is a free game series by a Mohawk-owned production company here in Quebec. They're taking Mohawk legends and stories from our community and transforming them into a playable game where you can learn the Mohawk language. Many of our Indigenous languages are critically endangered, and so this is the kind of thing that, the distribution it's for community, it's for young people, it's for old people, it's for schools, it's for people who are trying to learn the language, and we're really, really proud again to be the sole funder of this specific project. That was a lot of yapping from me. Mel, I'll pass it back over to you just to wrap things up before we have questions. But yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening to all of that.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. This is Isabelle and my first time. We can go to the next slide actually and just show some of our other sponsors. But this is Isabelle and my first time presenting together. And I feel like just listening to her go through all the projects, I feel like I learned so much again. Every time I present with someone from the team, I'm like, whoa, what? I for sure had chills as you were describing some of those projects, which is kind of a great segue because what we're going to shift to now is we're going to do a little bit of like an actors on actors type thing where I'm actually going to ask Isabelle a few questions just about the ISO and the type of work that we're doing in this space and chime in whenever I can, obviously. But I will also leave some time if there's any questions in this space, or I think online, I think we have somebody who's going to be chiming in with that. So first off, Isabelle, the question that's kind of most interesting to me is that, or most important to me, get us going here. And we can actually just go to the last slide, which will have some of our details if you want to continue to follow us and see what we're up to. I encourage you all to stay in touch and see what we got going on because it's awesome. There's so many great things happening. Okay, so Isabelle, the thing that I think I'm most curious about, because I was not at the ISO as it's been in this big growth phase, where now we're starting to take a look at XR and immersive storytelling. I'd love to hear from your perspective why it's important for the ISO to be involved in this storytelling space in addition to the other work it does.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my initiation at the ISO was really formed around this core belief that we are sort of just following artists where they decide to go. And our job is not to dictate, it's not to decide how things develop and how they change, but really just to follow the artists. And so, whether or not there is funding for these projects, they were being made and they were being made beautifully, but with so many of those barriers that we were kind of talking about. And so, for us, I think it's really just about meeting people where they are, being able to create opportunities, not only funding, but a whole ecosystem around them of opportunities, training, the market access, the audience growth. So yeah, that's what I would say.
That's awesome. I'd be interested to hear just a little bit about your personal journey too, in terms of investigating this storytelling medium. Did it happen before? Did it happen before you started at the ISO, or how did that come? When did those things start to come together for you?
So, I mean, from a personal angle, I will say that I realized about a year ago that my job is, as an arts administrator and someone who works very closely with artists and creators. And actually, both of my parents are artists. So I had this moment of realizing that, I was sort of playing out something there where this is what I knew and this is what I was comfortable with. I also think that, for a lot of communities, like you grow up with stories, you grow up with this very natural sort of understanding of why it's important and why it's meaningful and how it is directly tied to cultural regeneration and resurgence.
That was a really eloquent answer. It's so funny because I'm like thinking about my own relationship with XR and sort of immersive art. And I'm like, oh yeah, I just remember being in a thing and being like, what is this? But yours is just rooted in like such a really like beautiful vision for the future. This is how Isabelle and I are different. I'm finding out. She's really got it together. Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit here and talk about the pathways and protocols document. As we discussed, it is super foundational to our work at the ISO. So from your perspective, I know you talked a little bit about it on the slide, but when we think about, this space or any of the storytelling spaces, what are the intended outcomes with a document like this? What does the future look like with a document like this?
I mean, I think the document explains itself insofar as saying that it's not a map, it's not a how-to guide, but it's a really important first step about how to engage with Indigenous communities and what are the ways that some different nations and different communities engage with protocols around story, because as I said, story is very central to who we are as Indigenous people. So I think it's just a great primer and it's a great first resource for people. I also think when it comes to the XR, realm and specifically virtual reality, having a strong set of protocols in place when people are engaging with story in virtual reality is very, very important. I personally have had the experience, and I'm sure many of you have had this as well, where you drop into VR to watch what a lot of people call a cinematic experience. That's very intense, it's very emotional, and is heightened by the technology, and that's sort of the intent. But the onboarding and the offboarding is not there. And in the Indigenous VR projects that I've engaged with, there is that protocol that's built in. The creator ensures that when it's traveling, somebody is there to help people get into it and then have steps when they leave the experience. So those are the kinds of things that, you know, of course it's working with Indigenous communities, but will make everybody's work better. Will make everybody's projects have a bigger impact and also just be safer and more meaningful.
No, I think you're circling like just the authenticity. There's such a richness and authenticity when it's realized, right? I love that. Now, I'm in regards to the ISO's mandate, how does that mandate guide the way we approach emerging media like XR and like immersive storytelling?
I mean, I guess the biggest way and the closest that is to my daily work is sort of in our program design. And so we try to make our program design very flexible. We try to make it responsive. After every year, we sort of get feedback and listen to how people, you know, what worked, what didn't work, what needs to change. And of course, always trying to work with other people to be able to grow the program and expand our impact of the program. So this year, like I mentioned, we work with the Canada Media Fund, the CMF, and that was just able to bring certain projects have additional support. They also access a new funder. We are helping to mediate that relationship to clarify anything. So I think, I would say program design. What do you think, Mel?
I feel like I don't know enough. No, I mean, I think I'm still figuring out how the mandate is realized, because I come from a space of working. I didn't work specifically in the Indigenous sector of the sort of storytelling industry. I was just sort of more broadly working with underrepresented folks, but not specifically Indigenous the last 9 years or so. So I think coming to the ISO, I'm like, oh, we have like a hyper focus here on the Indigenous sector of our industry. So I do feel like in some ways I'm still like learning sort of what that means, right? Like to be somewhat exclusive with our inclusivity, right?
Right.
But I am a little bit curious, kind of while you touched on it a little bit, but it's like, what are some of the ways that like funders and institutions can continue to support this long-term growth and capacity with Indigenous-led immersive storytelling? I know that you mentioned that we're working with the CMF, but when you think about those types of relationships, what do you think are like key in those relationships to helping continue that growth? Because those are funds that we're like administering, right? So there is like still a connectivity, but I'm wondering what other elements go into a relationship like that you think help?
That's a great question. I think that for us and the way that we work, it's about for sure building a level of trust between us and the institutions we work with, and understanding that power of the ISO and the expertise, that word of the ISO, lies in our connection to community and our ability to administer these programs, develop things with an eye to sector. That's sort of like, that's our unwavering commitment. And I think that ties in again to the idea of narrative sovereignty. Indigenous folks want are organizations that are run by other Native people to have control of all of this stuff. And so I think it's about working alongside our partners to sort of see how we can align with, our goals of having that sovereign, independent, self-determination space while carrying out their mandate.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I think that there's this sort of like Venn diagram, this like space that I can just imagine my little bear arms. But this little sort of Venn diagram, this little space in the middle, where what these funders and other institutions are trying to do and what the Indigenous community is just trying to do for itself, in terms of maintaining its sovereignty, just maintaining our stories, right? Ownership and authenticity over our stories. And I, as I mentioned, sort of was coming from a space of, I worked in Indigenous organizations when I first entered the industry. I worked for an Indigenous broadcaster in Canada, but prior to that, I worked in Indigenous production. So all the shows that I worked on were either owned by Indigenous companies or were commissioned by the Indigenous broadcaster here in Canada. And then I went from that to going to work for the public broadcaster, which is, I, in this trusted circle, might say at that time, anti-Indigenous. They were very much, especially with their news outlets, continuing to push forward this certain image of Indigenous people, modern Indigenous people, that wasn't totally fair, wasn't accurate, wasn't flattering. And then I sort of saw this other side to the network where they had a desire to delve more into Indigenous storytelling. And I definitely saw both things occur where they had as parts of the team. And I would actually say this is true at the public broadcaster as it was at Warner Brothers Discovery, people who think like, oh, we can just make this little space for them and they can just exist in this space. And then there was this other side of both camps, where they were like, actually, I think we have to have them come in and make the space their own. And I think that's a little bit of maybe what you're talking about, Isabelle, where it's like, there is a way that we can function with institutions where we are finding that sweet spot, that Venn diagram overlap there, where we are existing within the way that they need to run, but also able to realize our mandate. It's a challenge, but I think it's definitely possible. And I think more and more, especially with the success of projects like North of North or Lisa Jackson's immersive project, I just think that the way those continuing to rise does, I think, make them see that it's possible to have both a commercial success as well as have this incredible relationship with an organization like ours. Now I want to, but maybe before I go, I'll just put it out there. Now's the time, I think, to start stewing up those questions. I have a couple more that me and Isabelle can dive into, but definitely encourage you to use this time. Isabelle, my next question, a little off the cuff, but I am curious to know, because our community is, traditionally, we have these elders in our community. There are knowledge keepers. They're the people who are telling us the stories that, I like how I'm just about to say me and Isabelle are in the same generation, and we might not be. But like that our generation is going to hold on to and bring forward. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience when you are talking about immersive storytelling with elders, because in my experience, I have definitely, I tried to explain Lisa Jackson's Dome project to my mother. I had the incredible opportunity of getting to experience it in Berlin. It was inside of a defunct crematorium in this sort of beautiful garden. And you laid on the floor and you looked up to this dome ceiling of the crematorium and listened to Wilfred Buck, one of our community's just like most prolific and incredible storytellers, tell stories and share knowledge. And I just I could have lived in that crematorium. And I was explaining it to my mom and she was like, you laid on the floor? So I do think that there's a little bit of work that our generation has to do in terms of onboarding them. And I'd like to hear if you've had any of that type of experience where you've had to share, and it doesn't have to be necessarily with an elder, but where you've had to sort of share what this medium looks like and how we can explore it with somebody from our community who maybe doesn't know.
Oh my God, that's a tough question because my grandmother has like 5 Facebook accounts because every time she forgets her password, she just makes a new one. So that's kind of the level that we're at.
Okay, so the apple doesn't fall far from the tree in your family.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think it's just about taking the time and like especially virtual reality is obviously we're in this space, and so that's the medium that's on my mind. A dome project I think is one of the more accessible mediums that you can bring people in, and it's very akin to going to a movie theater, whereas virtual reality I think is just a higher onboarding experience, as our lovely friends at Agog who have been wrangling us for the past few days know. I think that the one thing that comes to mind is not really answering your question, but when we were watching Wilfred Buck's The Dome Project, and I was really thinking about how, you know, you're hearing his voice. He's an elder. He's a knowledge keeper. He's Cree, so he's not. We're not from the same nation, but you know, there's so many people who didn't grow up in community, or who were taken from their communities at young ages, and to have this immersive experience where you are actually hearing an elder tell you these stories. You're sitting back, you're with, you know, people who you know and who you trust. That is like something that's, I think, really, really powerful. And one of the reasons why these mediums are so affecting.
Yeah, that's absolutely it. Like we're experiencing something that I think probably like our ancestors just experienced on a daily basis almost, right? And we're getting to sort of experience it more than just a 2D experience. It's actually like, yeah, I totally hear what you're saying. That's incredible. Okay, so let's switch over and talk a little bit about kind of the Indigenous creators. Let's just pretend that some of the members of our audience, whether it be here or on the stream, are Indigenous creators, that they are storytellers. They've already been telling stories. Let's imagine Lisa Jackson before she did Bidabin years ago. What sort of advice, I'm curious about this too, because I don't know, but what sort of advice would you give them if they're just starting to explore this type of immersive space for their projects?
It's a great question. I mean, definitely reach out for starters to us. I take meetings all the time. But I think most people where they are, if they're in cities, there are a lot of resources around them to try to get acquainted, see a lot of work, and then also identify what position, what role you want to be in. There is, because in so many ways our industry is just growing, just evolving, there's pressure to be a producer, a writer, a director, learn the technical side, everything. But, you know, I think it's important to focus on what you want to do. If you want to drive the creative, or if learning the tech side is really drawing you in or is inspiring to you, then do that. And collaborate with your peers, with your contemporaries, find them, work together. Mentorship is great, but the people who are at your level, and this is advice that I've gotten that I have followed and really appreciate, people who are coming up with you are some of your greatest mentors and collaborators. And you will be able to find people who have that tech knowledge or who want to be producers and can deal with the money stuff. And so you can focus on the creative. And I think that goes for immersive and traditional linear film and television.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I am fairly new to this space, which thank you for giving that shout out about the tech specs and such, and what a challenge it was for me. But I came here, guys, and look at me using my arms. I mean, I'm all about it now. You'll be sick of me by the end of this, if you're not already. But I came from a space where I was actually receiving pitches on behalf of, national broadcasters here in Canada, not just the public broadcaster, but the Indigenous broadcaster as well, was also a national broadcaster. And I think it is exactly what you're saying. It's the business of being generous with your peers. I think particularly when you are from an underrepresented community, and you're out there and you're looking for funding opportunities, or you're looking for exhibition opportunities, or anything, or even a position on a project that already exists, you can get that sort of crab in a bucket mentality. And I think that being generous with your peers, whether they're in your community or outside your community, it really, the rising tide does raise all boats. I feel like Vanessa's heard me say that a dozen times. And I think it's very, very true. And I think it's even more true in this space. The only other things I would probably add to what Isabelle is saying, well, for starters, I want to definitely highlight the business of reaching out. Before I joined the ISO, I did reach out, and I was just so surprised at how responsive they were. Like, they didn't know me. And I reached out and they were like, yeah, we can talk tomorrow. I was like, okay. So like, our doors are swinging open. I feel like in all of the presentations I've been a part of these last few months, having just joined the team, that's the one thing I feel I've repeated, is that like, we are open. We are so open, not only to storytellers who are wanting to access our funds, but also to potential partners. We're new. And so in that way, we are very sort of malleable, I think. Maybe that's not the right term. But we're just like very open, I think. So yes, very approachable. So it's like, I think you continue to have conversations with folks like Isabelle, whether it be at the ISO or another funding body, although I may argue that they're not as open as us. And I think it's about going to those market events. I think that the work is still finding its space in permanent places, whether that's planetariums or whether that's rooms like this. It's still finding its way to those permanent sort of fixtures or semi-permanent fixtures. But the other place that you can explore those is market events like film festivals and things like that. I know that there's always an accessibility issue in terms of those things, being costly or what have you. But I know for myself early in my career, going to maybe one festival full a year really changed my perspective on what type of storytelling was being done and what was happening out there. Okay, so do we have any other questions that are coming in from I can see you, but I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Yeah. So we got one great question here. Well, we've got somebody who's giving a bunch of thumbs up for North of North, loving the series. So
Love it.
another shout out there. And Floor asks, can you share any experiences sharing with elders and knowledge keepers about this technology, especially those who don't even like emails, smiley face?
I mean, I will say, even describing today's event, which as well, I think if we can, we should try to touch on why it's important for us to continue to do stuff like this. But even explaining to my own, my sister would die if she heard me say this, but to my much older sister about today's event and explaining it to my mom and stuff like that. One of the things I did say was really draw on my own experience and that sort of vulnerability that you have to have when you are entering a space like this and you're using this equipment for the first time. It is not our nature, I think, to say, I don't know what this is. I don't know what I'm looking at, or like, this is weird. I think I even said early on to you, Raul, I was like, sorry, what's this comfort thing? Because I was like, am I dizzy? Am I going to be sick? Like, it was so I think it's like the business of, if I had to talk to an elder or somebody who is really outside of this space, I would tell them that once you get inside of it, you cannot stop laughing, because I feel like Isabelle and I could not stop laughing. And we still have laughed numerous times since then. But that you do have to become comfortable with being uncomfortable, because the payoff is really worth it. This experience for me has been really worth it. I think it's really worth it to interact with folks in this way. And I can't wait to sort of experience more stories and things in a space like this. Because it's been so rewarding so far. I don't know, Isabelle, anything you want to add?
I mean, I'd say too that being able to get into VR and see something more narrative, where you're just sitting back and kind of watching, some of the things that you would come across at festivals or in exhibition spaces, I think is a great intro, because normally someone puts the headset on you and you're kind of in it and you get some of the benefits of being in that space and the amazement if it's your first time or first few times. And then I think for those who it will spark the interest in, especially when it comes to older folks, like then you can kind of ladder them up to trying to navigate in this world or be in this space. And I think anybody could do it. Like taking away any kind of exclusivity or that you need to be super tech savvy is important, because these spaces are designed so far, what I've seen, to be like relatively inclusive. And so I think laddering people up. It's a good question.
You're a tiny bunny. It's the most inclusive, and I've accepted it wholeheartedly. It's the most inclusive. I love that you just randomly jump to, and then I try to do it, and I feel like it's not as cute. But were there any other questions, whether it be from online or in this audience? Vanessa might be the best audience member I've ever experienced in my life.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Throwing smiles.
I am just going wild on the emojis, so I'm sorry.
No, it's amazing. It's really pumped my tires.
I think I see a question from Teresa in the back.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. Thank you. So I was wondering if you've had opportunities to collaborate with Indigenous people in the United States and in Canada. And the reason why I'm asking is I had been in touch with somebody who is Ojibwe from northern Minnesota, talking about language, right, and how to find creative ways, much like your example, I think, from the Mohawk language. So wondering if you've already had some experiences with language learning, right, and creative ways to display that. But have you been able to partner with people in the United States on that? Thanks.
That's a great question. Isabelle, do you want to start, or do you want me to dig in?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say quickly that it's something we've sort of had these like one-off abilities through other partnership funding to be able to work across the border. The bulk of our funding comes through Canadian Heritage, which is a department of the Canadian federal government. And so there are some restrictions in terms of people being Canadian, but, and I'm sure Mel will talk about this a lot, you know, our communities are across borders. So we're working really hard to find ways to overcome that, because the border is meaningless in a lot of ways in terms of us supporting our creators.
I think too, if you're talking about, we have a project now and we'd potentially be looking to partner. Like Isabelle's saying, we don't have that with our current funding streams, but we will, until the time comes that we have more permanent funding in the US, we will continue to do these one-offs. So that is like the call to action in terms of staying in touch and following us, because those things can come up, you know, they could come up in the next few months. Like, we don't know. We don't know what the future holds. The only thing that we know that the future holds is continued growth. As Isabelle mentioned, to us, being Indigenous isn't just being Canadian. We have the benefit, though, because the conversation about reconciliation is farther along in Canada than a lot of other regions. But being Indigenous to us isn't specifically tethered to Canada. So for those reasons, we are going to continue to expand our funding, expanding opportunities for storytellers. With some of we do have sort of like an international market development fund that's for exhibition and stuff. And we're getting a little bit of flexibility in space like that. And I can already tell with our CEO, Carrie Swanson, that she's like, yeah, that's the next level for us. Like that's the next steps for us, is to continue to expand for funding opportunities in the US and hopefully beyond. Hopefully we can continue into Latin America. And as you all know, we have Indigenous folks all over the world. So thank you for your question, Teresa. I love your avatar. Any other questions?
Yeah.
That mic guy.
First of all, this is amazing. Thank you so much for presenting everything, and it's been super informative, and I'm excited to look more at what you're doing and see more of it. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Have you, on the funding side, it sounds like this is kind of similar to Teresa's question, related. Do you have relationships with other groups in the United States as well? Like I'm in Seattle, and we have a group here that's been doing a lot of work in the Black community here in Seattle to do cultural preservation with elders in specific in the Black community here, and we've done multiple VR projects and like captured a bunch of history. We've also done a couple of game jams where we actually brought in elders and centered them, and the entire thing was about preserving their histories. And so I think there's a huge amount of overlap there that's really kind of amazing, and it'd be like great to talk just as far as like knowledge share, even if there's not the ability to technically contribute on that front from financing for artists here, but just at least building that connection would be interesting.
Well, sorry, you go ahead as well.
No, go first.
I was going to say that, I'm joining the team having just worked for an American company. And whilst there, although I was overseeing, underrepresented opportunities and things like that, DEI work, I obviously always had a special focus on Indigenous. We do have a couple sort of partnerships with American organizations now, like with Sundance, for example. But I think things like that, combined with some of the relationships that I was able to cultivate this last year, are going to continue to open that up. For example, one of the things that I'm bringing is that I was on a best practices it was like a community group for people who worked for large media corporations that were Indigenous. And that's where we, as Indigenous employees, sort of informed each other. And when I left that company, it was Warner Brothers Discovery in the States, I did ask that group, I said, well, I'm going to an Indigenous organization. Can I still be involved in this? And they said yes. And I actually very shortly after heard from a few folks who knew of other sort of community-based groups. So it's not really spaces where, let's say, there's funding opportunities or things like that. It's more community, grassroots level stuff. And I continue to participate in those conversations. We have other members of the team who just through their own work, I can think of the director of funding who spends quite a bit of time in the US because her partner is American. And so she has a different perspective on the Indigenous community in the US. And I think that those are the seeds of what the future is going to be in terms of those people could be co-collaborators with us. That may be where we find our funding opportunity through. So we are always open to join, more community conversations and stuff like that. We're a small team, but we definitely make space to continue to foster new relationships that can help us reach new heights. Thank you so much, Mike.
Bunny.
If there are no other questions, maybe I'll round us out. Oh, Manglebird. I'm so sorry, Mike.
So now that you've spent a bit of time in VRChat, do you see yourself funding projects for platforms like this in the future?
I mean, I would say absolutely, but I'd be interested to hear what Isabelle has to say. She's the one who's more in the weeds in terms of types of applications that come through and where they're at. So yeah, Isabelle, what do you think?
Oh my God, yeah. I think when we did that World Hop a couple of days ago, I was saying how I could, even looking out on this landscape, it's and I'm not the first person to talk about this, but you're like, okay, we're on the land here. Yeah. This is a really rich space for talking about whose land we're on. This is a virtual space. What does it mean to be an Indigenous person in an immersive space that obviously is related to the real world, but isn't? So 100%. And this is something that would be eligible in our funding, something I would love to see. I think could be super rich. And there are people talking about, how do you, like Skawanati, who's a very famous Mohawk artist who doesn't really isn't sort of in the film world, but is an artist proper. She's been working in virtual spaces talking about being an Indigenous person in these spaces through her artwork for decades now. So I know that there is this sort of like large body of work and of thought around what we are doing in these spaces and how to make them ours and meaningful. So 100%.
Well, and I'll just add to that. Love to hear you say that, Isabelle. I'll just add to that too, that even when I was going through the process of picking my avatar, I was like, when I saw the bear, I was like, oh my God, I'm totally bear client. I'm totally gonna select this bear. But I already felt like, oh my gosh, I can totally see these really indigenized avatars, things like that. I think this space just really lends it to that customization that you don't like. I've never seen mangled bird before in my life. And I'm like, that's seared into all of your avatars are seared into my brain now. So I think that, yeah, this space really lends itself now that we've had this experience. And that was really going to be my last question to Isabelle was like, why is it important for us to do things like this? And for me, it's that you just get to see a whole other side of storytelling, another avenue, and see all the nooks and crannies and the intricacies of it, and start to imagine how can that be indigenized. I am always thinking of things, how can that be indigenized, whether it's jewelry, whether it's, whatever. But Isabelle, I'd be interested to hear your perspective on that question.
I mean, I this is going to sound a little maybe, what's the word, prideful or something, but I think that the work that our storytellers are making is so beautiful, so profound, so rooted that it makes, when we talk about it and we bring it into spaces, it makes that space better. I'm a big believer in that. And so that's why I love to come in and talk about the people that we fund and the storytellers, because I think that there's so much that can be not taken, but can be learned, can be seen. And I do think our storytellers are leading the way. So I just am happy to talk about them whenever I can.
Yeah, I love that.
All right.
This has been so much fun. Thank
it.
you all for coming.
Thank you so much to Agog for having us. What a beautiful
yes, thank
space.
You, Raul, Lori, everybody, Vanessa, you guys have been so incredibly supportive, and Amy and Chip for that beautiful intro. We really appreciate it. And hope that I can't emphasize enough. Follow us. Tell us things that you think we don't know. I'd love to hear of other communities and groups that we should be aware of. But yeah, I hope that this is not the last time we all cross paths.
Amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.